我们反对的是共产党，它给世界带来了恐惧。这个带来的恐惧的原因，就是因为我们懦弱、自私。他们70年来欺骗了全世界，威胁了中国人，才让中国共产党有今天的全世界的风格。大家想一想，我郭文贵如果去了其他国家，我的结局是什么？不是把我锯掉了，是直接把我放到机器里变成火腿肠了，波式火腿肠。而且在座的很多华人朋友，你们根本没有机会站在这个舞台上，因为共产党70年来都是成功的。
1980, Dream Alley, December, no rain. On chapter 7, I find my pen, drawing closer to the truth or name. It's driving me insane. Smoking cigarettes fade, the silence after screams pain. Down on Baker Street, the circus once right. Suture armors inscribed, where the Irish shone bright that night. The carriage did arrive, as for who and why. Evil done in Victoria Street, painted red on one eye. The handgun, the curtains untied, the unaccounted bouts of treasures, so counterfeit, marching outside. It's gully yards, they be working all night long. Nobody's left to go on the go for doubles back, smiling face on.
They sounded like a symphony. This and girl, let me play out your ending. The wrong life will always fade away tonight, or to this taken from outside.
他的恐吓，他的蓝金黄，他的威胁，让我们失去了尊严，失去了安全，失去了发声的自由和权利。我们感恩美国，我们感恩西方的媒体朋友们，与我们一起寻求真相，寻求正义。
How can the truth get exposed to places where no one goes? The simple smell of a rose, the secrets start to unfold. Every person wears a mask of fashion, reason and lie. Every action has a reason, that reason is I. Oh Father, Father, Papa, oh Father, Father, Papa. In this life, how can we live without never sinning just once? We can forgive and forget, but we can live and let rest that cannot take the pieces that are coming to you as it light up. I hear a step close behind me, familiar smell, a flashing light. The door opens, we're turning around, the bench is blind, left and written. Touch, no, so unhappy, roll, no, this much felt too much to know. I know it's the end, can never think of the reason I fought to defend. The only justice I knew now lives on silently, worse written to be seen.
These wicked things sound like a symphony.
One turning around, the bench is blind, left and written. Reason to be the touch, no, so unhappy, roll, no, this much.
Life will always fade away tonight, or to this taken from outside.
共产党对西方的威胁，绝对不是我在这里能形容的。接下来用我们的行动来证明给所有的全世界看，共产党是世界上最大的毒瘤。共产党一天待在中国，它都是人类最大的威胁。郭文贵总是有一句话，我们老叫深陷羊骨陷大陷，我要用事实行动证明给你们。
Dear friends, the call to seize the overseas assets of the Chinese Communist Party has been driven by government institutions or political parties. It has been pushed consistently and relentlessly by one person with this person, Miles. Since as early as 2018, Miles has been speaking openly about the CCP operates not as a government serving its people, but as a system that forcibly absorbs private wealth and redistributes it to the political interest group. More than 60 large private Chinese companies were summoned one by one and forced to hand over their equity. And none dared to refuse. Why? Because refusal meant threat to their families, their children, and their personal safety. Passports were confiscated. Freedom of movement disappeared. Business were allowed to operate on if assets ultimately belonged to the state. Miles warned that this process was not socialism, but a modern form of state-backed asset seizure, followed by redistribution to elite power networks. In his words, history shows us that when governments nationalize assets in this way, it is never about justice, it's about control. This is why Miles has repeatedly called on the United States and Western governments to act, not with words but with enforcement, freeze assets, investigate the cause. Leave nothing untouched. The enormous sum of money connected to the senior CCP families are held overseas, including in the United States and Europe. Whether it is about real estate, financial instruments, or government bonds, Miles' position is clear. These assets should not be protected while ordinary Chinese citizens bear the cost. For years, people dismissed Miles. They said it was impossible. They said it was exaggerated. They said no one would dare challenge the CCP's financial reach. Yet Miles kept repeating the same message: follow the money, freeze assets, expose the system. No other figure has pushed this issue so publicly, so persistently, and at such personal cost. Today it is 139 days Miles lost his freedom. How many of you could spend only one day in the prison? And today is 39 days of Miles staying in the prison. And when it comes to demanding the seizure of the CCP-linked overseas assets, Miles has been the loudest voice, and for a long time, the only one, from the very beginning of what Miles started the whistleblower movement until today. His greatest hope has been this: to freeze and seize the money of the Chinese Communist Party elites and their families. Without cutting off their money, destroying the CCP is almost impossible. But we see Western mainstream media, we see parts of the US government, we see endless attack smears and suppression, and everywhere you see money at work, CCP's money, buying influence, buying silence, buying betrayal. And in fact, they are using Miles' money to attack Miles and the whistleblower movement. They forgot God. They lost faith. They stopped relying on moral principles. In the past, they believed in God, and that belief helped build their societies. And now they rely on CCP, and they believe the CCP instead. And what is the result? Vaccine disaster everywhere. Fear everywhere. Truth nowhere. When Miles first talked about seizing the CCP's overseas assets, everyone laughed at him and they said Miles was crazy. They said Miles was the most extreme, the most foolish person alive. So many so-called experts said, if you believe Miles when he says CCP overseas assets can be frozen, that alone proves he's a fraud. But then the COVID-19 virus came. We whistleblower movements NFSC were the first one about this. Starting from early 2023, something historic happening. Why? Because the U.S. Congress has formally begun a process of investigating, freezing, and seeking compensation from CCP-linked assets in the United States. First number, that is $4.9 trillion emergency relief spending related to the virus. The economic losses, $15 trillion, together $20 trillion, and this is the only beginning. Miles had said before, Because of CCP virus, the CCP will eventually pay with the wealth of the Chinese people until there's nothing left, not just for one generation, but for generations to come. Mao's own wanted action. And this COVID-19 made what once seemed impossible family become possible. The seizure of CCP assets.
From the beginning of the whistleblower movement to date, my greatest hope has been to seize and confiscate the money of those CCP leaders and their families. If their money isn't seized, it will be very challenging to bring down the CCP. Annihilation of the CCP is inherently a tough job. If they still have money, it's harder than going into space or reaching the sun. This is because the CCP is good at using blackmail, bribery, and honey traps, BGY. Today we are seeing American and Western mainstream media and people in the U.S. government framing, suppressing, and persecuting us everywhere. This is because those lackeys bought off by the CCP's money. They have forgotten the existence of God and lost their reliance on and faith in God. It is because they believed in God and relied on God that they have what they have today. They have forgotten already. They now rely on the CCP and believe in it. As a result, COVID vaccine-caused deaths are everywhere. From a moment when I started thinking about seizing the CCP's money to when I began talking about it, everyone laughed at me, calling me the craziest, most unhinged, and most foolish person in the world. Therefore, almost everyone, so many so-called experts, called me a liar and said, "Do you believe what Miles says about seizing the CCP's overseas assets?" Just that statement alone proves he's a fraud. Now the CCP released the COVID-19 virus. It has caused millions of Americans and tens of millions worldwide to die. In fact, the actual number of deaths is likely to be even higher. The vaccine disaster to come will be even greater. Yesterday, everyone saw an American professor say that at least 50 million people in the U.S. will die from it. This is minimal, and he said people would die like flies. He also said that now, for everyone watching the live broadcast, among your family and friends, you would see 3 to 8 people who have died. Yes, we're the first group in the world to say this. Now, the U.S. Capitol Hill has officially begun seizing and confiscating all of the CCP's assets in the United States. The first $4.9 trillion for America's emergency relief funds allocated over the past 3 years for the virus and vaccines will be paid by the Chinese Communist Party. On top of that, all the economic losses of $15 trillion bring the total to $20 trillion. And this is just the beginning. I have said that because of COVID-19, the CCP will drain Chinese people's money until they don't even have their underwear left, and the damage will last for generations. As long as the CCP exists, the disaster will last for generations. You may not believe this. Just wait and see. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I just want them to act.
So what happened with Dr. Fauci will be punished. Virus origin tracing will reach a conclusion, right? And that conclusion will become one of the most core reasons used to strike the Chinese Communist Party. In the end, it will be not just about responsibility or mistakes. It will be framed as crime against humanity. And what follows next is inevitable. The seizure of the CCP assets. No matter how politicians try to shift attention, Fauci will go to prison, and those who assist him will be punished and judged. That outcome is unavoidable. Fauci will be punished, virus origin tracing will reach a result, and that result will become a central legal and political justification to strike the CCP. The CCP will have no way out. The United States have no other option. Europe has no other option. They will not be able to defeat it ideologically overnight. But they can do one thing: freeze the assets, seize the assets, and use financial accountability as leverage. This COVID-19 virus origin tracing is not just about the past. It is about legal handle, a moral handle, a financial handle. And through that handle, the seizure of CCP-linked assets continue. This process now stop.
Now, inside the Chinese Communist Party, there's this strategy called using Europe against America. The CCP plans to unite with Europe and wants to use Europe to contain the U.S. The CCP and the people of Zhongnanhai You know what I'm referring to. The CCP's using Europe to contain America strategy has given us a second major gift. This shows the ignorance, stupidity, and arrogance of these people in Zhongnanhai. Fellow fighters, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. They don't even have half the ability or even a tiny part of many of our fellow fighters. If they had any common sense, they wouldn't think they could use Europe to contain America. Have they considered the blood ties, cultural ties, economic ties, security ties, geographical ties, and interdependent relationships between Europe and America? Additionally, there are unspoken shared beliefs and the reality that most of these countries are maritime nations. Given the CCP's limited resources and small market, do you really believe you can confront America after the rest of the world has finished? Foolish. Their stupidity is a gift from heaven to us. You can imagine that the CCP's leaders in Zhongnanhai are barefoot, with one hand picking their toes full of mud and one hand smoking cigarettes and touching this and that. They're like dreamers, smoking too much marijuana, methamphetamine, and ephedrine. The CCP's next move is using Europe to contain America. Through the pandemic, it will accelerate comprehensive cooperation between the U.S. and Europe, including Japan and its alliance. The next move of the U.S. will be the Hawley Act, the Justice for Victims of Coronavirus Act, which will extend the U.S.'s legitimacy of asset seizure and confiscation through its economy and judicial systems to its alliances. This is precisely what our whistleblower movement wants. Once this bill begins, the CCP will be gone. Absolutely gone. It will never come back. No amount of money can make them withdraw this law. Once the bill is enacted, capitalists will sense an opportunity for profit. They will react like a shark that has starved for 100 days, smelling fresh blood. There's no way to make them stop. What we need now is not to seize the money of overseas Chinese people. What can be seized overseas is the Bank of China branch in Los Angeles, which is run by Wang Qishan's family. It doesn't even have insurance, only accepts large deposits, and serves several neighborhoods and communities of the Wang Qishan family, the Chunfeng family, and the Yao family. It also serves companies in the U.S., Europe, and Japan operating under the guise of the CCP state-owned enterprises, such as Jack Ma Zan Financial, Ping & Group, Poly Group, and RICO, as well as those in the Middle East, like PetroChina, CNOOC, Sinopec, China Xinhua Energy, China Xinhua Group, and China Xinyin Group. They're all using RMB. Fellow fighters, all the money here represents decades of hard-earned money stolen from the Chinese people under the guise of benefiting national wealth. Not a single penny can be traced back to legality. Trillions of Jiang Zemin's and Zhu Rongji's family's money are deposited in UBS. You think we can let those go untouched? Of course, Switzerland will follow the U.S. actions. Let me tell you that following the Hawley Act is the RICO Act that will be used to deal with the CCP. All the money will be legalized. Totally. No matter what words you use to describe this act, they won't be enough to express how grand this bill is. Wow. Oh my goodness, as soon as this meeting gets going, huge information starts coming in. Oh my goodness. This is exactly what I've been saying about the U.S. Congress, the U.S. government, and the European governments. After the G7 meeting, everyone can see the world's three major actions. Europe will completely pull Russia and the CCP apart. Europe's task is to split the two countries, to keep them from working together. The United States is responsible for providing full support. Then the United States and Japan will go all in to deal with the CCP, converging in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. The U.S., Australia, Japan, and NATO will all join forces in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. In the middle of all this, there will be intense deal-making and money maneuvering, and in the end, the Chinese Communist Party will be. Everyone, remember this. For the first time, I directly heard a Western leader say that the United States may possibly carry out a decapitation strike in communist China, similar to what it did to Iran's Soleimani. I had never heard of this in the past. This was the first time. They said that as long as the COVID pandemic issue is confirmed by the U.S. and the NATO countries, no matter whether the CCP cooperates with the investigation, provides evidence, or how it responds, direct actions will be taken direct. This was the first time I heard this. Second, regardless of whether the CCP cooperates or not, as long as the West believes that COVID-19 came from the Wuhan laboratory, and regardless of whether it was intentional or unintentional, as long as it came from a laboratory, all overseas assets of the CCP families will be seized. Don't you believe it? You, CCP bigwigs, just don't believe it. You believe I, Miles Guo, am Guo the fraud, Guo 3 seconds, and Guo the rapist, right? Just don't believe what I said. Keep believing your own belief. Another thing the Western world understands very clearly and has now unified on at the G7 is that if COVID-19 came out of Zhongnanhai, and Zhongnanhai had knowledge of the subsequent events related to the PP, COVID, all the vaccines, and everything related were organized and planned, Then the entire world will publicly announce that annihilating all the CCP's organizations is the requirement of global justice, a major task of the next century. The world looks for accountability will not end all at once. If you don't believe it, let's just wait and see.
Why the US sanctions against Chinese Communist Party are multi-layered, cross-enforced, and designed to break the system rather than target ordinary Chinese people? Because American sanctions are not a single law. There are 4 toolbox. This toolbox includes like IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Power Act, the Global Magnitsky Act targeting human rights abuses, the Export Control Reform Act, Anti-Lists and Military End-User List, the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. Each tool hits a different pressure point. Together, they create multiple seizures, overlapping phrases, and no escape rules. Through these systems, the United States what they can do, freeze CCP's officials and their families' assets in the U.S., cut off access to the U.S. dollar and dollar clearing, block advanced technology, semiconductors, AI, and dual-use equipment, prohibits Americans from investing and designated Chinese companies, define party government military fusion enterprises as national security threats, and the legal justifications are already established. Human rights abuses, national security risks, military expansion, technology theft, and allegations related to the manufacture, concealment, or release of biological agents, including the virus and vaccines. That's why sanctions are not symbolic. They're system destroying. Now, inside the CCP, there's a strategy, what is it called? Using, like Miles mentioned, using Europe to counter the United States. Europe and the United States share blood ties, culture, security, alliances, economic interdependence, and core beliefs. Most of maritime democracies with shared strategy interests is expecting Europe to turn against the U.S. because the CCP money or market access is unrealistic. In fact, this strategy produces opposite results. It accelerates cooperation between the US, Europe, Japan, and allied nations. What comes is not fear sanctions, but expanded sanctions. And you see it today. Proposals like the Hawley style legislation aim to extend legal assets freezes and confiscation from the US system and allied legal system. Once this process begins, it can't be stopped by lobbying or money. Because when capital markets and legal systems smell this risk, they move like sharks scenting blood. And this is the key point. The goal is not to seize the assets of ordinary Chinese people. The assets being are targeted overseas are those held under the name of party, state-owned entities, or political protect families. Money accumulated over decades, often presented as national, but extracted from the Chinese people. If sections expand using tools like RICO-style legal frameworks, then asset seizure becomes fully legalized, institutionalized, and permanent across jurisdictions. And at that point, no slogan, no propaganda, no spending campaign can reverse it. Sanctions then stop being punishments. They become architecture, an architecture that isolates the party financially, legally, and technically, while separating it from Chinese people. This is why sanctions matter, because they are precise, layered, and irreversible. And once fully activated across alliances, they do not end quietly. They define the next era. Next, what I'm talking about is comes directly from public revelations made by Mao starting like in 2021. According to those revelations, the Chinese Communist Party at least began as early as 1990s to cultivate their next generation of private heirs through in vitro fertilization and other reproductive technologies, not for family reasons, but for political power and region survival. Some CCP officials used what can only be described as reproductive governance, governing through bloodlines, genes, and controlled offerings. One of our own whistleblower movement members personally worked in the United States and Canada for more than 25 years, directly assisting in taking care of those overseas private children of CCP leaders. This individual witnessed firsthand how CCP allies developed genetic mapping, reproductive control, and overseas of offspring systems across the US and Europe. Miles himself possesses a complete network map of the CCP's overseas illegitimate children, where they are, how they are protected, and how assets are assigned to them. On December 10th, the U.S. House of Representatives passed provisions in 2026 National Defense Authorization Act clearly stating that the CCP overseas assets must be lawfully disclosed. This marks a decisive stage. The destruction of the CCP has entered its final phase. Miles repeatedly revealed that inside the CCP's drawer exists a so-called Architecture Act project, a classified management system used to oversee a massive number of CCP senior officials hidden overseas, like children's secret assets. These assets amount to tens of trillions of US dollars. And what is their purpose? Not investment, not development, but weaken America, destabilize America, and destroy America. Today, step by step, reality is verifying what Mao said years ago. And Mao stated clearly, every single debt that the CCP imposed on 1.4 billion Chinese people, the new Federal State of China will calculate it one by one. All the CCP overseas money, all their descendants, and all their illegitimate children, they will be all taken over and managed by the new Federal State of China. And now, step by step, this process is unfolding. The new Federal State of China is not only about destroying the CCP. Its deeper role is protecting Chinese people. The greatest achievement of the whistleblower movement is this, completely separating the Chinese people from the Chinese Communist Party. If the world fails to understand this separation, it will be a tragedy. From day one until today, this has been one of the movement's greatest contributions. The second major contribution is awakening the United States, Europe, and the Western world. Only we did this. Without this awakening, Western funding, appeasement, and support of the CCP would have continued, pushing China into hell with no return. America has provided support. America is a country that stands as a beacon of freedom. But Wall Street and U.S. government appeasement policies allowed the CCP to rule China for 70 years, occupy China for 70 years, and enslave China for 70 years, more than 70 years. Of course, Western elites knew this about that. Almost no one among them failed to understand that China and the CCP is a slave system. The second greatest contribution of the whistleblower movement is forcing the West to recognize one truth: the CCP does not want your cooperation. The CCP wants your life. Without understanding, there would be no global momentum to dive towards eliminating the CCP. One of the most important breakthroughs was that the first government dared to publicly say this is a CCP virus by separating CCP from the Chinese people. Our movement prevented catastrophic consequences, including global anti-Chinese violence similar to historical tragedies. This separation saved lives. It prevented the Chinese people from being collectively blamed, haunted, and slaughtered worldwide. This is the meaning of what has happened. This is why the new federal state of China exists. Not to rule, not to replace, but to separate, protect, and preserve the Chinese people while holding the CCP accountable. History is now moving, and step by step, what was once called impossible is being verified.
Architectural art project, a folder code for the global illegitimate children of the CCP kleptocrats, a map of the genes, wealth, and the politics of the CCP kleptocrat families. In the 1980s, the CCP adopted a one-child policy domestically, but in order to be able to enslave the Chinese people for generations to come, the CCP kleptocrats have produced large numbers of red offspring through surrogacy, test tube babies, and mixed blood. Due to the large number and variety of these red genes, they are registered and managed by dedicated people. Relying on the wealth created by the Chinese people, these red offspring grew up with an elite education and became important figures in politics and business in various countries, expanding their political power through marriage and paving the way to run for government office. The red genes of the kleptocrats are all over the world and have become an important carrier of the kleptocrats to hide their assets overseas.
And there's anger in the United States that's not taken, fully spoken in the public. And there's also a new generation rising, what is insiders privately call America's future. And together, these two forces point in one direction: comprehensive sanctions and the full seizure of the CCP-linked assets. Miles once spoke privately with someone described as part of America's future, a young figure seen as a potential future Attorney General or FBI Director, a Secretary of Defense, or even President one day. During the conversation, he asked Miles a question that almost knocked Miles off. And he said, Miles, people are dying every minute. And if we prove that virus came from the CCP, do you really think we are only going to ask for hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars? Miles asked him what else he wants then, and he answered, we want the CCP finished. Miles mentioned large-scale trials, and he said that wasn't realistic. Then he reminded Miles of something he had said years earlier. What does CCP fear most? First, the collapse of firewall. Second, the seizure of the overseas assets held by officials' children and families. He said that is we need to do now, not later. Not at the negotiating table. This is no longer about numbers. This is why movements focus on legal accountability matter, why lawful institutions matter, why everything must be done through the rule of law, not here in random notes. Nothing is emotional. This is about legality, procedure, and permanence. Anger inside the U.S. leadership is real. people close to the president are described as furious day after day, not performing for cameras, but grappling with consequences behind closed doors. This is why discussions of trillions of dollars in liability, 20 trillion or more or less, are no longer unthinkable. At the same time, a new phase has already begun. Investigations are expanding towards assets held by senior officials' children, including those born or living overseas, and assets hidden through trusts, shell companies, and private intermediaries. There's also a discussion of compelling major corporations to disclose all historical dealings, communications, and data connected to CCP-linked entities, those that wealth held under private names but derived from public theft can be identified. Now consider this: once the United States formally begins large-scale asset seizure, it's lies. Well, no, wait. This legislation would pass 100%. This is what Mel said in his live streams on 29th of April 2020. And some lawmakers were like, worry, what if the CCP moves his money out early? What if companies deletes? What if assets flees to Europe or Japan? That is why the US is considering accelerated legislation and emergency executive orders to freeze CCP-linked assets across the US, allied systems simultaneously. And the truth is very simple. No country understands that the difference between the CCP and the Chinese people is in financial terms better than the United States. And there's only one effective method: freeze or large transfers. No sudden exit. No quiet withdrawals. No mass liquidation of property, stocks, or deposits. History shows us how this works. After Pearl Harbor, asset controls were imposed rapidly and comprehensively. Once the US Act's coordination follows, Japan will be the first to ally. Canada follow likely even more strictly, right? And Australia will not hesitate. Europe will have no choice. And once the system moves together, there's no escape route. You can't sell or leave. You can't wire or disappear. You can't quietly convert and exit. This is not about punishment alone. It's about system-wide containment. This is why what is coming is not partial sanctions, not symbolic actions, but total financial isolation and force across alliances. This is the direction. This is the logic. And once it begins, it does not reverse. Let me explain why the RICO framework is already in place and why the new federal state of China plays a critical role, not only in opposing or taking down the CCP, but in protecting Chinese people and their lawful assets worldwide. If China folks a version of RICO-style legislation and what some call RICO is treasured for vaccine compensation, asset recovery, financial blocking, or emergency seizure orders, the impact would be immediate and comprehensive. At that point, financial control would resemble historical wartime measures, and every account, every deposit, every property transaction would fall under monitoring or restriction. This is not speculation. This is how emergency economic law works. The disaster created by the CCP has reached a scale that forces government to act, yet the danger has always been the same: how to punish the party without destroying the people. people. This is where separation becomes everything. Recently, more than 100 institutions, along with dozens of major international organizations, have begun studying how to cooperate with U.S.-led actions to freeze overseas assets linked to senior CCP officials. Many of these organizations operate under NGO or public interest structures, but they are legally recognized international and compliant. This step matters because once asset seizure begins at this level, it is not symbolic. It is cause financial lifelines. It is isolated power networks. It moves fast. Now, considering long-arm jurisdiction principle and the U.S. law, the core logic is not simply who you are, but whether U.S. dollars wherever used, it is a transaction, an investment, or an asset involved dollar clearing, dollar settlement, or dollar-based instruments. It may fall under U.S. jurisdiction when sanctions activated. This is why fear spreads so quickly. But here's the key point. The new federal state of China is fundamentally different. It is not connected to the CCP. It does not rely on CCP protection. It does not operate through party states channels. Its role is not only to take down the CCP, but to protect Chinese people. This was, our CCP's, Our new federal state of China carries two identities. First, standing firmly against the CCP system. Second, serving as a legal and moral shield for Chinese people's legitimate assets and dignity overseas. This distinction is not cosmetic. It is structural. One of the greatest achievements by our new federal state of China is separating the Chinese people from the Communist Party in the eyes of the world. Without that separation, sanctions become collective punishment. Without that separation, fear turns into hatred. Without that separation, innocent people suffer. By clearly drawing the line, our movement helped Western governments understand that supporting the CCP is not supporting China, and that confronting the CCP does not mean targeting Chinese people. Advocates believe that this awakening changed policy in the US, Europe, and allied countries, shifting away from decades of appeasement and towards accountability. In that sense, the NFSC's role is not destruction, but prevention of collective blame, prevention of financial chaos for ordinary families, prevention of historical tragedies repeating themselves. This is why NFSC matters, because it defines who must be sanctioned and who must be protected. And in that era of long-arm laws, cross-border seizures, and global financial enforcement, that distinction with the difference between justice and disaster. This is the role of new federal state of China to play. And the MAOs make all of this possible. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Follow me and I'ma set us free. Take down the CCP. Let me tell you what I've been through, baby. Lived a life that was hella unfair. Seen things that been driving me crazy. In a country where the leaders don't care. Didn't think we had the courage to change it. Tore it down and they weren't prepared. Everything that they kept us from saying. Now we talking and they better be scared. Take from us. Tell what and who to love. Swear I finally had enough. It's time to rise above. Take down the CCP. Take down the CCP. Follow me and I'ma set us free. Take down the CCP. I said, take down the CCP. Take down the CCP. Communism's dead to me. It's just killed our families. The CCP.